with the Labor member for Kingsford Smith, Matt Thistlethwaite. Thanks for joining us, Matt. You got a cup tip? Why don't we get into the cup straight away?
I do, Chris. I'm going to back Finch. Ran fourth last year, and Chris Waller, who's been training out in my area, ridden by Karen McAvoy, who certainly can ride a cup winner. So my money will be on Finch. I think he'll start favourite, but nonetheless, good luck to anyone that's having a punt this afternoon.
Yeah, and what about these nup to the cup numpties? What do you make of all this?
Well, look, certainly in Australia, everyone has the right to protest as long as they don't do it violently or do damage to any property. That's the main thing. No one supports what occurred in the Four Corners episode that was unveiled a few weeks ago, and no one wants to see ex-racehorses treated in that manner. And I certainly worked around the racing industry for many years as a union official representing strappers and stable hands and jockeys. I've got Randwick Racecourse, the home of racing in Sydney, in my electorate, which employs a lot of people. So, you know, I think that the people that I know in the industry, no one wanted to see those situations occur. But nonetheless, everyone's got the right to protest. I think everyone should just enjoy the Melbourne Cup for what it's worth. It's a great Australian sporting event, and enjoy this afternoon.
Yeah, I think, of course, all Australians would be against animal cruelty, and no one wants to see any animals mistreated, whether they're horses or any other livestock around the country, or pets for that matter. This 7:30 report, the ABC story, though, I mean, effectively was about horses being sent to the knackery at the end of their racing careers, and they were breaking rules, racing rules about how many should be sent to the knackery. It's never very pretty, but I mean, in the end, horses, animals of all kinds are sent to the abattoirs and dispatched. So I think there's been an incredible exaggeration of the controversy here, hasn't there? I mean, most horses, after their racing, are retired to the paddock and pretty well looked after, and the industry is spending plenty of money making sure that happens as often as it can. And obviously there's going to be instances where it doesn't happen.
Well, the shock of the Four Corners episode, Chris, was the fact that the rules were broken. And that's the point that I think that they were highlighting through that. And that the industry has gone out of its way in recent years to bring in new rules. And one of those is the use of the whip in the straight and the restrictions on that. So there have been new rules that have been brought in, and they're about ensuring the viability of the sport, but also the welfare of the animals. And that's the point that in this case, and we hope that it's an exception, that the rules were broken, and that's why it's been given the highlight that it has received in the media. But no doubt the industry will get together and make sure that the rules are abided by into the future, and that we have a sustainable industry and one that caters for the welfare of these majestic animals.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Matt, on to matters political. What's your view of these foreign interference laws? We learned on the weekend the first time that they've been used. That's letters sent to former Prime Minister Tony Abbott because he's speaking at a Conservative conference, a public event in Sydney, and the organisers were sent letters as well. I mean, it just seems to be a ridiculous diversion from what these foreign interference laws were designed to combat.
Well, these laws were put in place in the last Parliament, and Labor certainly supported them. Now, when a law is put in place, it's up to particular agencies to police those laws. I don't believe that Tony Abbott has been breached of those rules at this stage, but some have said that he may have to file a return, if you like, to indicate that he's captured by those laws. That's something that Tony Abbott, as an individual, will have to get advice on and look at.
But surely you wouldn't support anything like this. Surely it's just absurd, in fact obscene, that a former Prime Minister speaking at a public event about Conservative issues should have to answer to anybody over foreign interference.
Well, rules are rules, Chris, and that when they're put in place by the Parliament, they must be adhered to. And whether or not Tony Abbott is captured by them will be a matter for the department to look at, and no doubt his legal advisors. But I'm not going to say that anyone should overlook a particular rule or law simply because it is a speech, because that's certainly not in the spirit of the legislation. So no doubt Tony Abbott would be getting some advice, the bureaucrats would be having a look at it, and a decision will be made in the future. Well,
I don't think you'd be getting advice. I think you'd be just telling them to go jump, is what we read. We'll hear from Tony Abbott later on this, but I mean, surely if this sort of event is captured by these laws, then the laws are wrong, right? You need to go back and have them revised.
Well, that'd be a matter for the government. No one said that the government's going to change the laws. We haven't seen anything like that. That'd be a matter for the government. They brought these laws to the Parliament. They went through a process through the Joint Committee on Security and Intelligence, and some changes were recommended and made as a result of that. And if the government wants to change those laws again, it's up to them to bring something to the Parliament, and Labor will give it full consideration.
Yeah, well, we read just now on the website, the Australian website, that the Attorney-General Christian Porter is going to shake up the staff and the skills of the team administering these laws, so that'll be the first step. We'll see what happens. Now, I want to get on to the Labor Party, Matt, and the discussion, post-election discussion. You're waiting on the review to come from Jay Weatherill and Craig Emerson, I think it is, but there's been a lot of public statements about what the party needs to do. What surprises me is that so many people seem to be openly ruminating about what the party stands for. Surely Labor members know very clearly in their own minds what the party stands for. It's just a matter of what policies you implement to demonstrate those values.
Oh, I certainly believe that we all know and understand what we stand for, and that's good quality jobs for Australians, rising incomes, improved living standards and protection of our natural environment. We want to see Australia move ahead as a nation, and many of the contributions that have been made by my colleagues, both within and outside of the Parliament, I think have reflected that. But there's nothing wrong with members of Parliament or Labor members expressing their view about which direction the party should take. In fact, I actually think, Chris, that a lot of people join the Labor Party for that specific reason, because they want to have a say in the future of Australia. They're very passionate about that, and they wish to put their point of view, and that's a great thing for our party, because it means that we're the party of ideas and trying to progress the nation.
Yeah, I just think that some of the discussion has been surprising. As I said, it's as if people are looking to find out what they think the party should stand for, and they're looking for guidance from people to do that, and they're worried that they've lost connection with mainstream Australians, which to me is bizarre, because the whole point is to be elected to represent mainstream Australians. But, for instance, you there outlined very strong values that a lot of people who either support the Labor Party or would consider voting for them would agree with. The question is the policy mix to implement them. So you're not going to deliver growing incomes and good quality jobs for Australians if you're adding $400 billion worth of additional taxes and more than doubling our climate change policies with all sorts of ramifications for energy prices and reliability in this country. So surely it's just a matter of not so much reassessing your values, but looking at those policies that clearly we're not going to implement those values.
And Chris, that's why we're having a review. That's why we're doing this process of consulting with the Australian public and asking them their views about our policy mix. The great thing about Australia is that we're a democracy, and that this contest of ideas comes up every many years, and we get to choose at the ballot box who we like to lead the country into the future. Now, we accept that we couldn't convince Australians at the last election of the merits of our policies, and we're reviewing them at the moment. That will entail a discussion like the ones that we've been seeing over the course of the last few weeks by Labor MPs and people outside the party, and that's a good thing. The review will come down on Thursday. We'll have a look at it, and then we'll get on with the job of consulting with the Australian public, developing our policies, and then putting our program at the next election. That's the great thing about the Australian democracy.
Is it fair to say, without being too prescriptive here, without detailing exactly what policies you're going to support, but given your focus on economic development and jobs and aspiration, then clearly the problems in the policy mix there, you had too much on the taxation side, you're increasing taxes by way too much, and also too much on climate action, two factors that were going to deliver economic negatives.
Certainly on tax reform, Chris, we all know that tax reform at the best of times is a very difficult ask with the Australian public, and we had
well, because they're right. You're not questioning their judgment, right? The Australian public are right to reject too many taxes.
Well, John Howard was able to introduce a GST. Now,
no extra taxation though. No extra taxation. He didn't. There was no net increase in taxation. You were looking to raise an extra $400 billion in taxes. Surely the Australian public were right to reject that.
Well, look, I accept that they didn't go with our taxation policies. Be they right or wrong, we have to accept that, and we'll review those policies. But it comes from the point of view, Chris, of trying to do what's in the best interests of Australia, trying to grow our economy, trying to create good, sustainable jobs into the future, trying to invest in education, particularly vocational education, where you've got skill shortages and all of these sort of things in the future.
Let's just come back to this taxation point, though, because you were telling me that the Australian public are slow to embrace taxation reform. I mean, it's a critical point, this. Surely the problem here was your $400 billion in extra taxes. Surely the public were right to reject that. Surely you're not telling us that the electorate were too silly to realise how brilliant it was going to be to pay an extra $400 billion in tax.
Oh, look, I accept, Chris, that we couldn't convince the Australian public of the merits of those policies.
Well, we all know you couldn't convince them, so surely you've got to accept that they were right.
Well, we'll review those policies. That's why we're doing the review. That's why we're consulting with people and saying, what do you think we should keep? What do you think we should dump? And we're in the process of doing that. And, you know, I don't accept that everything was wrong that we did at the last election. So there are some policies that we'll keep, there's some that we'll reform, and there's some that we'll probably dump. And we'll get on to that in the wake of the review when it's released on Thursday.
Great stuff. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Cheers, Chris.